This is gonna be a little hard to see because I have a lot of stuff in my craft room and we're warping all these tiny little dowels, but I set up to warp this way because I wanted to show you how to work one of my suggestions. And this suggestion is warping between a chair, this nice little teal chair, and a table, in this case my desk. And I've used just wood clamps and I've rubber banded my dowel to the wood clamps. And on this side I've used scrapped yarn to tie my dowel to the chair. So once you have your dowels all tied on and you've confirmed that they're the same distance apart on both sides, you want them even, we can go ahead and get warping. I've already tied the end of my yarn. This is really pretty teal baby merino yarn from Melorigo. I've left a tail long enough to sew up the sides, and I'm going to go ahead and start warping. And I'm going to warp in a figure 8. I don't usually warp in a figure 8 because I don't usually like having to deal with that extra loop. But in this case, if you warp up in a figure 8 and you push that extra loop to the bottom and start your row with a pick 2 drop 1, then it will it'll work out nicely. So we are doing a figure 8 around these. So you come up underneath the bottom one and then go up underneath the top one and so on. Okay, I'm close enough to 19. So we're going to go ahead and tie off. The next step is that we're going to tie this dowel onto our yarn, and I'm going to change my setup for filming this. I'm already partway into what I was working on, so let me just explain really quick. I have a dowel, not a very long dowel, but there's this dowel here, and I lay it on top of my warp, and then I take a thin crochet cotton in a little hank like this, and I pick up the next front thread of my warp and I pass that cotton hank behind it and then catch it over my dowel like so, and then pull it snug. Don't be careful about pulling it too tight or it can be hard to readjust your dowel on your warp because you're gonna be pushing it up to the top when you're done. And I'm catching only one warp thread at a time. You could do multiples if you have a thin yarn, but that's up to you. And if you catch multiples, you will need to make sure that you keep your shed straight. Try to make sure that you're always going around your thread and then your dowel in the same direction. And also every once in a while double check, run your hand underneath here and make sure you haven't accidentally skipped a thread. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll come back once I'm ready to take this off of its sort of temporary warp here. So here is the finished warping up now on its new dowels, and it needs a little bit of tensioning, but I'll do that on the loom, otherwise it's ready to go. So that was a bit time consuming. Why take the extra time to do that? And that is the main reason why, because I can drop it and nothing is wrong with it. At some point you're probably going to need to warp up off of your loom, and if you're anything like me, at some point you're going to do something that you're going to lose one of your dowels and you're going to have to rewarp. I wish I had this on video, but actually when I was just finishing this warp here, one of my knots came loose and my dowel slid out. Fortunately, I had just finished this. I was just retying the ends, and so nothing happened. But had I been transferring those dowels that were just laying inside the warp onto a loom, I would have lost half my warp and it would have taken a while to fix it, or I would have had to rewarp it. So having your warp tied on like this will make it extra secure. Now that alone is probably not worth doing this, but the other really nice thing about this is that these are going to be really small starting loops, because, you know, if you went over a dowel, your starting loops would be as large as your dowel is, whereas with the thread, they're only going to be as large as your thread is. And I don't like to work off of string hold, you know, I don't like to warp up over string holding bars, or whatever you want to call them. I like the stability and the sturdiness of dowels. I just don't like the really big loops you get off the dowels. So when I warp up this way, I get the benefit of a sturdy dowel to work off of, but the small end loops of the thread. So that's how I prefer to warp up. I don't always warp up that way, but when I want the small loops, I'm going to warp up that way. And another really great way, or another really good reason to warp up this way, if you want to be going out somewhere with your sprung. So say you warp up in the house, but you want to take it out like to a park and attach it to a tree and sprung outside. You can warp up like this, and you don't have, you know, you can just take it like this, or you can roll it up onto something and it'll all stay in place and you don't have to worry about it going anywhere. So yeah, that is my favorite way of warping, especially if I need to warp off my loom. But even if I don't, I'll sometimes still choose to warp up this way because I get those nice small end loops and the added security of knowing that my warp isn't going to slip off my dowels or anything. Nothing's going to happen if something breaks or one of my knots fail. Tell me what you think of it. Do you want to try this? If you do, let me know how it goes. Do you think it's too much work? Do you have another preferred way of warping up? Good luck if you're warping, and I can't wait to see everybody's warped up looms ready to go for Sprung tomorrow.